Private William Slaper served in Company M of the 7th U.S. Cavalry Regiment and participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn on June 25, 1876. As a survivor of this significant conflict, he later documented his experiences, which are regarded as an important historical account. Slaper's narrative is distinguished by its thoroughness and honesty, offering a soldier's unique perspective on the battle. Before we proceed, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Lieutenant Sturgis and I were assigned to M Company, departing from St. Louis in a fine-fetal, heading towards Fort Abraham Lincoln, located near Bismarck, Dakota, along the Missouri River, which served as the headquarters for the 7th Cavalry. An amusing incident occurred during our journey that may entertain the reader. While we paused for coffee and food in Fargo, Dakota, we experienced a 2-hour delay. An Irish sergeant, an apparent veteran in charge of our car, directed a group of recruits to visit a nearby saloon, taking their canteens and firearms to trade the latter for liquor, and instructed them to return with the spirits in their canteens. Upon their return with the whiskey, he assembled a squad of recruits, armed them as guards, and marched them back to the saloon, where he reprimanded the owner for buying government weapons and confiscated the pawned arms. In this manner, he secured a generous supply of whiskey at no cost. I must admit, I found it to be a clever scheme. Consequently, from Fargo to Bismarck that night, the sergeant's car was filled with a lively and cheerful group of soldiers. We arrived in Bismarck in good condition and were transported across the Missouri River to Fort Lincoln, where 6 companies of the 7th Cavalry were stationed. We, the new recruits, were organized and assigned to our respective companies. I was assigned to M Troop, which had recently returned from a scouting mission. A day or two later, we departed for Fort Rice, where we spent a winter that was largely uneventful. It was during this time that I truly felt the severity of the cold, with temperatures frequently dropping to 40 degrees below zero. Among my various responsibilities, we cut ice to fill the large ice house, which would later benefit the infantry stationed at the fort, while we, the cavalry, were out on campaigns across the dry, dusty plains, relying on alkaline water. As spring approached, we received orders to return to Fort Lincoln, where we set up camp in preparation for an expedition against Sitting Bull and his hostile Sioux warriors, who had left their reservations in significant numbers and committed various acts of violence. Several Sioux sub-tribes, along with their families and extra ponies, gathered at a general rendezvous point that was later identified along the Little Bighorn River in Montana Territory. A few months earlier, Captain Tom Custer, the brother of the general, had been sent to the Standing Rock Agency on the Missouri River, about 40 miles downstream from Fort Rice. His objective was to capture Rain in the Face, an Indian wanted for the murders of Dr. Hansinger, an Army veterinarian, and Mr. Ballerin, an Army post sutler who had wandered away from their unit. With the help of Charlie Reynolds, General Custer's chief scout, Captain Custer successfully apprehended Rain in the Face and brought him to Fort Lincoln for imprisonment. However, Rain in the Face managed to escape during a prison break and joined the hostile forces, swearing revenge against Captain Tom Custer. On May 17, 1876, my regiment, the 7th Cavalry, left Fort Abraham Lincoln under the command of General Custer, with General Alfred Terry overseeing the entire expedition. Our regiment gained a reputation for its outstanding horses, personnel, and equipment, reflecting Custer's commitment to high standards. During that period, luxuries were few on the untamed plains of the Northwest. As a young recruit, I paid little attention to the events unfolding around me, unlike some of the more experienced soldiers who meticulously documented their experiences in diaries. As a result, I find myself unable to recall specific dates, camping sites, and other details as clearly as I would like. I was merely a novice, lacking experience in both survival and combat with Native Americans. However, destiny had prepared numerous opportunities for me to learn in the following 6 weeks. Our first day of marching was extensive, leading us to set up camp by the Little Heart River. This initial march was filled with excitement, as some horses, having just emerged from their winter rest and well-fed, were unruly and challenging to control. That night, we encountered further excitement when a fire broke out on the surrounding prairie, necessitating our efforts to contain it and prevent it from reaching our camp. Fortunately, the damage was minimal, and we were soon able to rest. Everything went smoothly until June 1st, when we found ourselves in the perilous Badlands of the Little Missouri. After retiring to our tents that evening, we awoke the next morning to the unwelcome surprise of a snowstorm. Our tent, shared by two men, provided little comfort. The biting cold caused discomfort for both men and horses alike. Nevertheless, we endured the situation without significant harm. No significant incidents occurred until we arrived at Powder River, where our expedition was reinforced by 4 companies of the 2nd Cavalry, along with some artillery and infantry. At Powder River, our wagons were sent back, and our sabers, including those of the officers, were packed away in return. The regimental band also departed, and from that point on, pack mules were responsible for carrying our rations, extra ammunition, and supplies. Scouting missions were carried out, indicating potential trouble, and while rumors circulated, no official reports were issued. On June 22nd, we departed from Powder River. General Terry offered Custer 4 companies from the 2nd Cavalry, but Custer declined, asserting that his regiment was capable of managing any Indian village on the plains independently. He also turned down the Gatling guns. The march on the 22nd was brief, covering approximately 12 to 15 miles. The following day, we advanced about 30 miles, and we covered a similar distance the day after that. However, we were awakened during the night to prepare for a night march, which confused me, as our goal was to rendezvous with General Terry near the Bighorn River on the morning of June 27th. I am not privy to the specific orders General Custer received from General Terry, apart from the written directives that are now publicly accessible and likely familiar to anyone studying the Custer battle. It appeared to be a common understanding among the troops that Custer and Terry had planned to meet in the Little Bighorn Valley on June 27th. This unexpected night march greatly contributed to the fatigue of our horses during the Battle of Little Bighorn. With inadequate grazing and traveling in light marching order, our horses received little rest and minimal grain. I distinctly remember stopping at dawn to prepare coffee, but I fell asleep under a tree while holding my horse's bridle and did not awaken until I was called to line up. We did not unsaddle, which meant our animals had little opportunity to rest. This was the significant morning of June 25th, filled with anticipation and excitement, as we were aware that we were on a hot Indian trail and could encounter the enemy at any moment. As we moved quickly throughout the morning, the excitement intensified, and every action was observed with keen interest. Around noon, General Custer convened his officers and provided instructions. Our Company M, led by Captain Thomas French, along with Companies A and G, was placed under the command of Major Marcus Reno. At that moment, we were not aware of General Custer's strategies or the specific companies he commanded. It was later revealed that Companies C, E, I, F, and L were directly under his leadership, while Captain Benteen was in charge of Companies H, K, and D. Additionally, Company B, led by Captain McDougall, was tasked with guarding the supply train. I remember that Captain Benteen's unit moved to the left, while General Custer's forces advanced straight along the right bank of the tributary of the Little Bighorn River. Major Reno's command, which included our company, marched parallel to Custer's on the left bank. Shortly thereafter, Adjutant Cook arrived from Custer with orders, prompting us to turn sharply to the left and increase our speed. We trotted down a slope towards the Little Bighorn River, which we crossed. Company M took the lead, fording the river first, followed by Company A with Company G bringing up the rear. Suddenly, gunfire erupted, and bullets zipped through the air. I instinctively ducked, attempting to evade the shots. This was my first encounter with combat, and I must admit I was terrified. The sight of the Native Americans riding and firing in all directions while shouting and whooping was intimidating. They appeared almost naked, their bodies painted in a grotesque fashion. Once we crossed the river, we dismounted in a wooded area to prepare for ground combat. The number 4s held the horses, while numbers 1, 2, and 3 moved forward to the firing line. As we got ready to dismount, our horses, sensing the imminent danger, became agitated. Some bolted uncontrollably into the open, carrying their riders toward the Native Americans. We never saw young Smith from Boston again, neither alive nor dead. As we formed the firing line, we spread out to the left. The Native Americans closed in, their numbers swelling, creating a dust cloud that allowed many to flank us and attack from behind during our retreat. In this moment, I witnessed the first of my fellow soldiers fall, Sergeant O'Hara, followed by another and then another. Remarkably, I had managed to conquer my initial fear. I was no longer terrified, yet I remained acutely aware of the dire danger and the strong possibility of not surviving. The Native Americans were now advancing in overwhelming numbers, unleashing a relentless barrage of gunfire upon our small unit. It became clear that our position was no longer tenable, and we received orders to retreat to the horses located in the timber. We hurried back as quickly as possible. Amid the chaos, some individuals holding the horses released them before the riders could arrive, leaving them stranded and in a vulnerable situation. It was reported that Reno asked Captain French, "Well, Tom, what do you think of this?" French responded, "I believe we should withdraw." Reno then issued the command to mount and retreat, although I did not hear it. The only sounds that reached my ears were the continuous roar of Indian rifles, the sharp crack of cavalry carbines, the war cries of the Native Americans, and the shouts of my fellow soldiers. Upon reaching my horse, I noticed that our numbers had significantly decreased in the timber. Shortly thereafter, Private Henry Coltsbutcher, Captain French's striker, was shot in the abdomen while attempting to mount his horse. He collapsed to the ground, and Private Francis nearly dismounted to help him. I also dismounted, and together with Francis, we pulled the injured trooper into a dense thicket, hoping to shield him from the Native Americans. William E. Morris, another comrade, joined us to assist with Coltsbutcher, who we feared was gravely wounded. We left him a canteen of water and quickly remounted, rejoining the retreat toward the river, following our fleeing comrades. After the battle, we found Coltsbutcher's body, where we had left him, untouched and unscathed by the Native Americans or their women, despite the brutal slaughter and mutilation of our wounded comrades in the river bottom. I cannot claim that our retreat from the river bottom was executed with military precision, but I observed no signs of chaos. Numerous individuals had come before me, and some were significantly ahead, making it difficult for me to accurately recount their actions or the sequence of their retreat. I did not cross the river at the specified fort. Instead, I had to leap my horse into the water at a location where the bank rose approximately 6 to 8 feet. Upon landing in the stream, my horse nearly lost his footing. As I surveyed the scene, I spotted trumpeter Henry Fisher from M Troop navigating the river, with Lieutenant Benny Hodgson gripping one of his stirrups. Hodgson, injured and on foot in the water, was being pulled across by Fisher, who had plunged into the stream to help him. Despite the barrage of Indian gunfire, Fisher successfully reached the opposite bank, dragging Hodgson along with him. However, as they ascended the slope, another shot rang out and Hodgson collapsed, lifeless. I presumed he had been killed instantly. My own situation was extremely precarious. As I urged my horse through the water, I observed Indians swarming around the fort above, many of them urging their ponies to that location, seemingly unaware of my presence. Perhaps they considered me a lone and inconsequential target, opting to pursue more significant prey. Bullets zipped through the air around me, as Indians on both banks and in the water engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat with our soldiers. Death seemed to be everywhere, yet Providence appeared to protect me, allowing me to cross the stream without injury. The crossing proved to be a fatal location for many of our men, and the subsequent retreat to the river and the steep bluffs on the opposite side resulted in 29 casualties. I believe the thick dust stirred up by the horses and ponies of the combatants significantly contributed to the escape of many individuals, as it hung heavily in the air, limiting visibility to just 50 feet in any direction. In the midst of the turmoil, between 2,500 and 3,000 Indians charged on their ponies, generating a whirlwind of dust and confusion. After crossing the river, I encountered the formidable challenge of ascending the steep bluffs, which were so abrupt that many weary horses could not carry their riders to the summit. Consequently, men had to dismount and lead their animals while enduring relentless gunfire from Indians hidden in the brush along the riverbank. During my climb, I came across the lifeless form of Dr. DeWolf, one of our surgeons, who had been shot and killed in his attempt to reach the top. Upon reaching the summit, I found myself unharmed and joined Captain French along with approximately 20 other men. Captain French exhibited remarkable composure throughout the conflict, his expression revealing no trace of fear. His poise and courage were truly commendable, providing me with a sense of reassurance under his command. However, I became increasingly worried about the rest of our forces and the whereabouts of Custer, questioning why he had not delivered the promised support. It appeared that we were on the verge of being overwhelmed before any reinforcements could arrive, as the Indians surged up the bluffs, aiming to encircle us. Soon after, Captain Bentine arrived with his 3 companies, looking relatively unscathed compared to Reno's beleaguered troops. I couldn't help but ponder Bentine's absence and why he had not come to Reno's aid in the river valley. His lack of presence was perplexing, particularly given Reno's timely withdrawal, which likely spared us from a fate similar to Custer's. After joining us on the hill, we mounted our horses and advanced in the direction where Custer was thought to have gone. But the overwhelming numbers and fierce fire from the Sioux warriors compelled us to retreat back to our original position on the hill. Even there, we were not safe, as Indian sharpshooters occupied the higher ridges, launching heavy volleys against us. We took the most strategic position available to us within the limited time we had. There, we set up a temporary hospital surrounded by staked horses. We formed a battle line outside the perimeter of the horses, and the fighting resumed with increased intensity from both sides. We were instructed to lie flat on our stomachs, minimizing our exposure, as even the slightest visibility could provoke a barrage from the Indians. It wasn't long before we began transporting more injured men to our makeshift hospital. Many Indians occupied higher ground, beyond the effective range of our short-barreled carbines. Fortunately, our first sergeant arrived, equipped with his personal rifle, which allowed him to suppress the Indian fire from those elevated positions. Captain French, calm and collected, managed operations from the center of our line, sitting upright as bullets flew in from all directions. I was impressed by his composure as he extracted jammed cartridges, loaded weapons, and surveyed our surroundings without showing any signs of agitation. Our entrenchment was rudimentary, and I remember using my butcher knife to dig into the ground to create a mound for my carbine. At one point, a bullet struck the edge of this mound, sending dirt into my eyes and temporarily blinding me. Later that afternoon, while lying flat, a bullet cleanly severed the heel of my left boot as if it had been cut with a saw. That was the closest the Indians came to me, but I witnessed many of my comrades endure far worse fates. Amid the turmoil, some humorous moments arose. Among my company was Happy Jack, a cheerful individual whose laughter resonated through the gunfire, uplifting my spirits and courage. On another occasion, while transporting an injured comrade to the hospital, we briefly let our guard down and walked upright. A bullet grazed my comrade's ear, causing him to fall to the ground. Thankfully, it was a superficial wound, and after checking on him, I was able to reassure him of his safety. Upon returning to my position, I witnessed a fellow soldier being shot in the shoulder, rendering him incapacitated. The heavy gunfire persisted until dusk, around 9 p.m. on the 25th, prompting us to strengthen our defenses and enhance our breastworks. At dawn on the 26th, the combat resumed with renewed intensity. As the first light of day emerged, a stray pack animal wandered past our line, still burdened with its load. 2 troopers and I stood up to relieve the animal of its cargo. Drawing on my packing experience, I quickly began to untie the ropes, but our actions caught the attention of the Indians, who opened fire, compelling us to seek cover once again. A stray bullet struck the corner of a hardtack box in the pack, and we hurriedly discarded the load, prioritizing our return to our positions along the line. These were the first shots of the morning on the 26th, marking the start of another chaotic day for both our troops and the Indians. The previous night, Major Reno and other officers had ensured we remained alert, walking among us to prevent anyone from succumbing to sleep. It was a challenging endeavor to resist the temptation of rest after the excitement of the previous day, but we had little chance to recuperate. When the fighting resumed on the 26th, Dr. Porter, the only surviving surgeon, called for volunteers to fetch water for the wounded, who were desperately in need. This was an extremely hazardous task, as the Indians occupied the brush on the opposite bank, controlling all access to the water. I did not join the first group of volunteers, but did participate in the second. We carefully descended the hill through a ravine until we reached its opening, where it flowed into the river. We needed to traverse the exposed 30 feet to the stream, fill our canteens or camp kettles, and make our way back while under fire. The first squad had ventured out without the foresight to position marksmen to suppress the Indian fire, with gunfire directed into the underbrush. However, when my team went to fetch water, skilled riflemen were assigned to provide covering fire while we collected the water and returned to the ravine. Despite these precautions, an Indian shot pierced the camp kettle I was carrying, resulting in a considerable loss of water. After several attempts, we managed to fill all our containers and returned to the hospital, where the water was a much appreciated blessing. I have read Captain Godfrey's account, which mentions that all volunteers who brought water were awarded medals of honor by Congress. However, I did not receive such a medal, nor did I hear of anyone else being honored. During our trip to the stream, we encountered Trooper Mike Madden, who had been shot in the ankle in the ravine. Mike, a robust individual, had been part of the 1st Detachment. Regrettably, his leg was later amputated in the hospital. In a light-hearted moment, the surgeon administered a strong dose of brandy to Mike before the amputation. Mike underwent the procedure without a sound and was given another drink afterward. With a smirk, he whispered to the surgeon, "Doctor, cut off me other leg." Mike eventually found work in the harness depot of the department in St. Paul. My comrade Jim Weeks and I made the water trip together. Upon our return, Captain Moylan requested a drink from Jim, but Jim retorted, "You go to hell and get your own water. This is for the wounded." The reply was met with silence, yet I suspect it was a difficult reality for Moylan to accept. After delivering water to the hospital, we returned to our posts on the firing line. Just as I settled down, the man to my left, Henry Rutten, was shot in the shoulder. The day unfolded in this manner, with Captain French sitting upright, commanding the firing, and facing Indian bullets without flinching. Even though we were surrounded by thousands of better-armed Indians and outnumbered 100 to 1, I found that fear had dissipated, despite our slim chances of survival. I must commend Major Reno for his outstanding leadership throughout the battle on the hill. I also had the chance to observe him twice in the river bottom, where he remained completely composed. His demeanor was a testament to his leadership and ability to maintain calm under pressure, particularly in light of the promised support from Custer that never materialized. Our ammunition was nearly exhausted during the fighting in the bottom, and had we not retreated to the hill, our fate would have been dire. I remember seeing Reno walking among the men throughout the night, nudging them with his boot and encouraging them to stay alert. This was a remarkable act of bravery, as even the slightest movement could attract Indian fire. It is astonishing that he was not shot, and his composed presence undoubtedly motivated his fellow officers and troopers. I have come across accounts claiming that Reno was intoxicated during this battle, but I can categorically dismiss that as false. I never witnessed any signs of drunkenness or saw him consume alcohol. As dusk descended on the 26th, the Indians retreated, allowing us to lead our thirsty horses to water. Unable to locate my own horse, I took another, a fine black steed that belonged to Captain Weir, as I later learned. After that, the firing ceased, and we held our positions throughout the night. The following morning, we conducted roll call, and many men were missing. Thanks to our first sergeant, John Ryan, I obtained a copy of the roll call that listed the deceased and missing personnel. As we noticed a large dust cloud advancing up the valley, some speculated it might be the return of the Indians. However, we soon learned it was General Terry's command. This news must have been a profound shock for him, as he was scheduled to rendezvous with Custer on June 27th to initiate a coordinated assault on the Indian village. Upon his arrival at our location, he emotionally recounted the fate of the Custer command. The situation was incomprehensible. This was our initial indication of Custer's demise, and it struck us hard, as every soldier had lost comrades from Custer's units. No one had anticipated such a catastrophic defeat. We began preparations to transport the wounded, and regrettably, many horses that were too injured to proceed were euthanized. Subsequently, we were directed to the site of Custer's defeat, where our duty was to bury the fallen soldiers. Equipped with only a few spades, we endeavored to inter the bodies, but the circumstances were grim. We could only remove a small amount of earth, place a body within, and cover it back up. Some remains were left exposed, and the foul odor of decaying corpses, having been exposed to the relentless sun for 2 days, made it impossible to conduct a proper burial. The sight of numerous dead horses further intensified the horror of the scene. I did not have the opportunity to thoroughly examine the battlefield, but from what I observed, it was evident that these men had been taken by surprise and killed swiftly. It seemed that many had shot their horses and used them as makeshift barricades until they met their end. In one particularly gruesome sight, we discovered two men lying between the legs of their deceased horses, a stark reminder of the rapid and brutal nature of the assault. The bodies, stripped of their clothing and valuables, indicated that the attackers had sufficient time to loot and desecrate the fallen soldiers without interference. The mutilations inflicted were too gruesome to articulate, featuring scalping, skull fractures, and deep lacerations. Some victims, likely injured, bore arrow wounds to their eyes, necks, abdomens, and other sensitive areas. I observed Captain Tom Custer's remains, the most disfigured of all, with numerous arrows embedded in his body. His death was believed to be a form of retribution for his earlier arrest at the Standing Rock Agency. Captain Custer's body was positioned near that of General Custer, with Adjutant Cook's remains close by, his face partially scalped, including his distinctive sideburns. In contrast, General Custer's body was largely intact, having sustained 2 gunshot wounds. Some speculated that the Native Americans spared him out of respect for his courage, while others thought they intended for his fellow soldiers to recognize him. Boston Custer was discovered near the bodies of his 2 brothers, while Mark Kellogg, the journalist who accompanied the expedition, was found nearby. The positioning of their bodies closest to the river indicated a desperate final stand against an overwhelming force that rapidly closed in, leaving little opportunity for defense. I assisted in burying this group, using my spade to cover Custer's body with additional earth, creating a larger mound than the others. It is difficult to comprehend that Custer's body went unrecognized when a party returned the following year to recover the officer's remains. Unlike the others, his body showed no signs of mutilation, and the substantial mound we constructed should have clearly marked his grave. The Native Americans must have derived considerable satisfaction from knowing that Custer had fallen, as he was regarded as a fierce and relentless adversary. He was a courageous and bold soldier, yet also a demanding leader. He owned several horses which enabled him to switch mounts frequently, while our weary horses bore heavy burdens, leading to their fatigue even before the battle commenced. Our horses not only carried their riders, but also blankets, carbines, revolvers, haversacks, canteens, 10 days' worth of oats, and 150 rounds of ammunition, totaling over 10 pounds. Given the enforced night march to reach the Little Bighorn, it is understandable that our horses were exhausted prior to the engagement. Some of these fatigued animals were brought in by the rear guard, including my friend's horse, which had collapsed, thus sparing him from participating in the battle. The issue of forced marching was contentious, as it was widely recognized that Custer had disregarded General Terry's orders. I possess a copy of Terry's written directives, which clearly state that Custer was to adhere to orders unless he had justifiable reasons to deviate. The instructions also indicated that the columns of Terry and Custer were to encircle the Indians, rendering escape impossible. Although the order does not explicitly mention June 27th as the date for the meeting, it suggests that Terry anticipated being present at the time of the attack. Custer was under arrest by the directive of President Grant, and his yearning for glory and redemption may have compelled him to take a reckless risk. Upon first observing the village, he must have recognized that his forces were insufficient against the thousands of warriors present. Many, myself included, believe he erred in splitting his command. Had he maintained the unity of his forces and launched an assault on the village from one side, he might have achieved success, or at least driven the Indians away. I once inquired of Captain French, who was at the battle, what he would have done had he been in Custer's position. He responded that there would have been no engagement. It is noteworthy that Captain French, typically reluctant to criticize fellow officers, was willing to express his opinion on this matter. None of the officers involved in the battle have publicly expressed their opinions on whether Custer was justified in splitting his regiment or in engaging the Native Americans prior to Terry's arrival. After interring the deceased on the Custer field, we proceeded to examine the Reno battle site located in the river bottom. The fallen were laid to rest where they died, and the scene was horrific. Isaiah Dormant, a black scout and interpreter, was discovered with numerous arrow wounds and deep lacerations. Corporal Henry Scollin had his legs severed, and Jim Turley's body was found with a hunting knife embedded in his eye. Additionally, Gordon, Myers, and Summers from M Troop were so badly mutilated that they were unrecognizable. Although I did not see Charlie Reynolds' body, I suspect it was not treated with dignity. Numerous other bodies were dispersed throughout the timber, but I was unable to see them all. Our retreat from the river bottom was well timed, as the sheer number of Native Americans and their continuous reinforcements made our escape fortunate. I attribute our survival to Reno's leadership. During my hurried dash toward the river, an Indian came so close that I could have struck him with a saber had I been armed. My fellow soldier Smith, whose horse charged into the Indian lines, may have been taken captive. From our vantage point on the bluffs, we observed numerous fires in the Indian village on the night of June 25th, with Native Americans dancing around them. I was apprehensive that they might be burning and torturing defenseless captives at the stake. Once the burial of the deceased was completed, our next priority was to tend to the wounded from Reno's command. To be continued.